在も卒業時半や腹見た辞書言語保育同一細工役したりし低い空意識
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, coming to us from Aspire Games, the same team behind the Star Wars 5e project, now coming to us with the limitless adventure of Unbound Realms, the one and only Galiphile, aka Stephen Kiel. How you doing tonight, man?
Good, man. How are you?
I am doing good. Thank you for venturing all the way up to my monastery to participate in the madness that happens.
Sure.
So, a tradition around here is starting with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
So I've been a huge fan of Magic the Gathering ever since I was, 8 years old. So I started playing at the end of '93, I think, and then intermittently from there. And then through playing Magic in the early 2010s, right before 5e came out, my buddy Ross invited me to play in a 3.5 campaign with him and two of his friends. And so we did that for 5 or 6 sessions, and then 5e came out. We migrated to that, did 5 or 6 more, and then the campaign fizzled out, as they're wont to do. So that was my first experience with TTRPGs in general, and then just like a shitload of 5e with my own playgroup, which he was involved in. And then Star Wars 5e came to fruition from that. And then, of course, Unbound Realms now.
Yeah. Now, since Star Wars 5e is right at front of the Kickstarter, it is something that I do want to cover a little bit.
Sure.
So, obviously, Star Wars and tabletop have a very, very storied history, especially Star Wars in the D20 system. Had you guys already dipped into working with some of the other D20 Star Wars games that had come around before this, or was this completely from scratch?
So basically from scratch, right? So my major experience was 5e. So I had my own playgroup for which I was the DM, and I had upwards of 6 players at a given time. From there, I ran Lost Mines of Phandelver, and then I also ran a campaign based on Baldur's Gate, the first game. Thankfully, none of my players had played that game, so it made it an easy campaign to pull from. And when that ended, I started a really, really crappy version of Star Wars 5e for that group. It only had 4 classes. It was very limited. We played a campaign with that, and it was really fun. Then I moved to a new state, so that playgroup obviously broke up. And then I honestly just got kind of bored, and so I started reviewing my Star Wars 5e notes and basically redid it from the ground up and released it for free, and it just got a huge following right out the gate. So it's all the core concept of Star Wars 5e was always that it's 5e to Star Wars. It's not Star Wars to 5e, right? So another Star Wars RPG or tabletop game like Edge of the Empire, porting that to 5e is not like a logical solution, right? So the key thing has always been that it's 5e first.
Yeah, I can certainly get that, and obviously now you're working on Unbound Realms.
Yep.
Which I think the first thing to tackle is Unbound Realms taking a multi-genre approach to the 5e rule set, or is it a universalist one? Because those are two different things.
I would be curious to know what you mean by them being two different things. However, I will say that the whole core concept is that it's setting agnostic, right? So one of the big 3 values of Unbound Realms is versatility, and the goal is that you can use it for any setting that could reasonably support like a TTRPG. So, I mean, the obvious fantasy and then the obvious sci-fi, but then there's also like a Wild West campaign, which I'm actually playing in like a steampunk Wild West campaign using these rules right now. We've got a couple episodes posted. So like it facilitates that, right? Superheroes can work. Lovecraftian, or whatever the new word for that is, Eldritch Horror, I guess. So really it's just one rule system that is very robust and can support any reasonable setting.
Yeah. And to go into what I meant by universalist versus multi-genre. A universalist approach would obviously be one where it's a toolkit that's built for whatever kind of campaign the table wants. This would be your GURPS, your Savage Worlds, your Hero, that kind of thing. A multi-genre approach would be one that supports multiple genres, but it's tailor-built for those collection of genres. I suppose an example of that would be wine. What's old is new, because it has a variant for high fantasy, it has a variant for space opera, and it has a variant for modern action. But it's
just so kind of like Pathfinder and Starfinder.
Yeah, like Pathfinder. Like, could you do a Wild West with Pathfinder or Starfinder? Technically, yes, but with the amount of work you'd have to do to make it work, at that point you stop homebrewing and you start becoming a backseat designer.
Yep,
is how I see it, and I've said this elsewhere. My philosophy with homebrewing is that homebrewing, house rules, what have you, should be a spice. And I don't know about you, but I don't like putting an entire container of pepper on my steak. No.
I do, but to each their own. And that's
What would you take? Would you take the ketchup bottle on one hot dog and put the entire thing on it? I guess.
Well, I don't eat ketchup because it's a trash condiment, but that's a whole other conversation.
Okay, fine. Ray Poupon.
Yeah, I would put a lot on a hot dog. Yeah, I like mustard.
Do you like a little bit of hot dog with your mustard?
I do. I like my sugar with coffee and cream.
I mostly use monk fruit, but fair point. But some of that comes from my time with Rifts, where the house rule book that I had was the size of a small source book. But it's one of those things that I think is important to nail down. It sounds like the approach is leaning into agnostic.
Correct. Yeah, I would define it as setting agnostic.
Mm-hmm. So, is this a standalone book, or is this a book that would require the D&D book Trinity?
So this book is a standalone. So it's a comprehensive overhaul of 5e, basically rebuilt from the ground up. And same thing, kind of thing I did with SW5e, but like way more robust. Like I learned a lot, obviously, over 5 or 6 years of SW5e, whatever it worked out to. So I've kind of like taken that knowledge here and just expanded on it a lot. So the goal is we're going to have 6 total books, but this first book can function pretty much on its own. The biggest thing that will be missing is like DM guidance, which will come in a later book, but most like DM knowledge is pretty universal across games. So that's not particularly an issue, especially if you've DM'd 5e, you wouldn't have any issues with this. And then for monsters, but we'll have rules on using existing monsters for Unbound Realms. There are some like minor tweaks to consider, but generally speaking, you can use them right out the gate.
Mm-hmm. So I think we should get into the core end of things first. So
sure.
Now this isn't the first 5e overhaul that I've covered on this channel over the last couple of years. There's been plenty of them, and there's probably going to be plenty more after that incident. But several of them have kind of a set of bullet points on some of the major changes. A big example I can think of is Everyday Heroes, that has an appendix listing some of the major shifts from core 5e rules to the version of 5e that it's using for that game. What would be some of the primary bullet points, the most forward-facing bullet points of changes or shifts to the core mechanics going from 5e to Unbound Realms that you'd want players to be able to know?
the core bullet points, right? So we have an overview packet, which has 2 or 3 pages that are dedicated to basically going through chapter by chapter of the book and highlighting the key differences from 5e. So like, I'm talking about like, we'll just at the start, I guess, like species are different in Unbound Realms. They're very similar to, I mean, I guess they're similar, but they're kind of weaker, and this is deliberate because backgrounds are kind of stronger. But they're also like, there's so much fluidity to species, right? So species, all our species are divided into major and minor traits, and you can mix and match, right? So instead of having a half-elf race, you choose the human major traits and the elf minor traits, or vice versa, and that's your half-elf. And you can do that with every species. There's a whole lot of modularity. I actually made a post on this on Kickstarter just the other day that you can check out to get an example of how it works too. Backgrounds have a very similar philosophy, not quite as robust, but they're way more powerful and more impactful than they are in traditional 5e. The classes, there's 15 classes. Some of them will be like, you'll see the roots, but they're brand new, and they all have way more customization. Huge emphasis on how Warlock had more than one layer of customization beyond subclass. We're doing that with every class. Customization options are, feats are divided into major and minor. Instead of just one tier of feat, you get 9 feats from your character itself, and it's not instead of ASIs, it's in addition to it. Like, there's so much.
I'm
like,
glad that
it's literally.
I'm glad that you specified that, because that's one of the things I've tried to house rule plenty of times, because I felt and I might be stepping on ground here, but I felt that having feats as an ASI alternative kind of missed the point of why feats were established to begin with.
Yeah, and like in SW5E, very early on, I wrote a very quick variant rule that's just called ASI and a feat, right? So instead of getting +2 ASI or a feat, you get +1 ASI and a feat, right? So that's like the major philosophy at those 4 levels. At 4th, 8th, 12th, and 16th level, you still get that +1 ASI, and you get a feat, and then you also get a minor feat, a major feat at those levels, and then you also get a minor feat, one with your background, and then another one at 6th, 10. 14th and 18th levels, right? So 9 total feats just from your class. And then you still get ASIs, and you get two ASIs with capstone increases at level 20. So like, it's closer to like how Barbarian goes above the threshold for strength and con. Now every class does that.
Yeah. Which certainly is fair. Now, when it comes to, you mentioned major and minor traits when it comes to the choice of species.
Correct.
Just for throwing it out there, what would be an example of a major and a minor trait for human, for instance?
So it's not the trait. So it's 2 pools of traits, right? So our species and our backgrounds are generated using a point system. Everything has a weight. And a +1 ability score is worth 4 points, right? So in skill proficiency is worth 2 points. So for species, the major traits is just a 12-point pool, and the minor traits is an 8-point pool. So you add those together, you get 20, but that means you can also just mix and match between species. So it's not the traits themselves that are major or minor, it's just the pool attached to each species. So for instance, for our human, their major traits is 2 ability score increases. They're just free, you choose them, either +2 to 1 or +1 to 2, it doesn't matter. Then you get an ability that lets you get a bonus die on demand. And then their minor trait is just +2 to an ability or +1 to 2 minor ones. So that's how they split. And you can just mix and match with another species.
Yeah. And since you have major and minor feats, what is the dividing line in terms of impact, or if there's a guiding dividing line between major and minor on that front?
So the names on those are pretty indicative, right? Major feats are more impactful, minor feats are less impactful. So the 3 like key pillars of TTRPG and 5e in general, and Unbound Realms even, is there's the adventuring, combat, and social components to it, right? So combat is always the most mechanically robust, right? Because there's so much more you can do, and for most tables, that's the more important part. So most of the feats, many of the major feats are tailored towards combat, and then the minor feats focus a lot more on the adventuring or role play component, the social component of the game.
Yeah. Now, that being said, when it comes to one of the other pillars that you put up with, which is battle forms and styles, is this kind of an evolution of the fighting style mechanic that classes like the fighter had in 5e?
Correct, with a very, very material twist, right? So the fighter in a lot of the classes in general have fighting styles. A lot of the fighting styles were just based around a passive, right? Dueling gives you +2 to damage. Archery, or whatever it's called now, gives you +2 to attack rolls. Those are all gone. So there's no more flat modifiers. We are much more strict on the whole concept of bounded accuracy. Instead, the fighting style is now a tree. So there's 40 fighting style trees, and they each have 3 components. The first tier, the first component is the dabble, which is just a bonus action is all it gives you, but it's a bonus action tailored towards a specific type of combat or a fighting style, right? Fighting style is the tree, fighting dabble is the first tier. So an example would be like dash as a bonus action, right? That's one of the fighting dabbles. And then there is a practice, which is the second tier of that, and it enhances that in some way, the dabble. And then if you already had the dabble, it also lets you do that as a reaction on your turn. So now you can.
And
sorry, my headset got out again. I don't know what's going on with this.
yeah.
But yeah, so the idea is that the practice, if you have the dabble, it lets you use your reaction proactively to do whatever. So you could dash as a reaction on your turn instead of using your bonus action, or you could do it twice as a bonus action and a reaction, or 3 times if you really need to get away. If you want to play Sonic, you got to go fast, right? And then the technique is the third tier, and that's like the great weapon mastery, where it gives you this crazy ability that like really enhances the combat style. They're all built in a similar capacity, but they enhance combat in some way, and they all engage with your proficiency bonus in some way.
Yeah. The way you describe it, it sounds like it's not a direct chain where you have to get one, then the next, then the next. But if you do that,
Correct.
You will get more out of it.
Correct. Yeah. So there's obviously a perfect linear synergy. If you go, so one of them is dueling, is one of our trees. So if you go with dueling dabble, dueling practice, dueling technique, you're going to be the best duelist with those 3 features, right?
Yeah.
But you could also mix it up, right? So dueling lets you use a shield. So you could take the dueling dabble and then shield practice, right? And shield technique or whatever. So you can really mix and match. There's no restriction within a tree. However, to get a technique, which is the third tier, you have to have at least 1 practice. That's the only restriction, but it can be any of them.
Yeah. So I'd like to put that in practice, because there's one particular type of build for martial characters that 5e's attempted to address, other games have attempted to address, and results have been mixed. The nadir of this was when 3rd edition tried to address this, and that is 2-weapon fighting.
Yep.
5e has its take, which is just the second attack doesn't get as much bonus. Obviously, 3rd edition had the infamous feat tax, or as my brother likes to say, pay to not suck. How would you tackle it with the whole style setup that you have here?
So it's rooted very similar in 5e on the front, that if you have nothing, it's just a bonus action attack and you don't add your ability modifier to damage. Exactly the same. If you get the dabble, which is the first tier, it lets you get that ability modifier to damage like normal. Once you get the practice, if you have the dabble, it now lets you do it as a reaction on your turn instead. So you free up your bonus action for something else, right? So this is great for potentially for a rogue, or in our operative, who wants to dash as a bonus action and then attack action, and then, oh shit, I missed. Now I'm going to use my reaction to do 2-weapon fighting to get my sneak attack, right? So that is how the first 2 tiers work. And then the third tier lets you take a penalty using your proficiency bonus and make another attack. So it's like a flurry. And then it also has other components to it. You can dump attacks to increase your AC, things like that. So it's a very more impactful tier than traditional 5e, but it's not the Nick property, which I don't like. Candidly, I think it's a bad mechanic. But the Nick property in 24.
I haven't read 24 yet, so I'm not sure what that was.
Nick is one of their weapon properties, which I actually really love this system, and we have our own version of it that will come in a later book. But basically, it just means that you can make a free attack when you attack with a Nick weapon. It's silly, is frankly what it is. It's just like the weapon masteries are just not very balanced against each other in my mind, and that one in particular is very strong.
That feels a little too.
Yep.
That feels a little too useful. Like
Correct.
What I like to call false choice.
Yep.
In the same way of if in the same way that even if you have the choice to do a bunch of different options, there's a certain option that everyone's always going to take, which is a bit unfortunate. Now, with that in mind, when it comes to, it also sounds like you're doing since you talked about casting styles in that preview, it sounds like you're doing a similar analogy to fighting styles with the spellcasters.
Correct. Yep. And it's the same identity comp, it's focused on casting. Obviously there's 12 trees similar to there's 40 fighting style trees, but it's the same idea. The dabble gives you a bonus action. The practice enhances that dabble in some way if you already have it, or gives it to you if you don't, and then more features that are related to it, and then the technique enhances it even further. So again, you can mix and match, or you can go straight up the same tree to really focus on a specific playstyle. And those are like, some of them are touch casting is one of them, right, which is focusing on spells that you cast in melee combat when you literally touch somebody, or weapon casting is when you use like the weapon cantrips and stuff like that. So there's 12 trees for that as well.
Yeah. Now, speaking of, you mentioned earlier that backgrounds are significantly powerful, and backgrounds originally gave you a feature and gave you some proficiencies, but there was the issue that their impact was kind of situational.
Correct.
How are you addressing that with Unbound Realms?
So we've trimmed out all the ribbon stuff, right? So like the ideals, personality flaws, traits, and whatnot, because they're kind of like, it's obviously just a jumping off point is the intention, but they always felt more like a restriction. Based on your background, so we're getting rid of that, and then there's just structured more like species, right? So your background now gives you a 1 ability score increase, it gives you some proficiencies, it gives you a feat that's a part of your background, right? So that's the more like flavorful part of backgrounds now, and then there's also just more traits, right? So you might get a bonus die when you make a charisma check. You can add a bonus die on the fly. Once per rest type of deal, or you might learn a maneuver, which we call tactics, but you might learn a maneuver and get a superiority die, and you can use it once per rest type of deal. So there's a lot more to them, but it's all very mechanic oriented and less about flavor, which is ultimately should be more up to the player and less up to the book.
Yeah, and since we're talking about fighters earlier, in part because I always feel fighters are underappreciated in D&D. This is not a new problem, but
yep,
the common background that a lot of people pick when they pick fighter is soldier. So with the background system, what would be a close equivalent to getting the idea of this character as a professional soldier?
Without looking it up offhand, I'm pretty sure it's called soldier. I'm pretty sure we have a background called soldier, and then it has we also have sub backgrounds in the same way that there are subspecies. Like you could elf, you could be a wood elf or a city elf or whatever. Backgrounds have a similar role, and the ones this one has 3. Whatever our soldier, I think it's called soldier, and then it has like officer, quartermaster or something like that, and then the third one is like generic soldier, but the name eludes me right now. Enlisted maybe. But then, so the major gives you +1 to probably Constitution, and then a couple of skill proficiencies that are related to being a soldier, and something else. I could look it up, but I don't know it offhand, right? Yeah. And then the 3 sub background options give you a feat that's more related to that like specialty, and then it also gives you just some more traits related to that specialty. So you choose the soldier background, and you can take any of the 3 sub backgrounds, or you could take the minor traits of another background, just like you can with species. So you could mix. If you're a soldier and an entertainer, you can do that.
So, shifting a bit back into classes, one of the first things that I noticed is, instead of this being a varying thing depending on class, it sounds like every class, regardless of which class it is, gets their subclass features at the same levels.
Correct.
3rd, 6th, 10th, 14th, and 18th.
Correct.
And it also sounds like you have the possibility of cross subclassing, which 5e obviously does not do.
Yep.
So because of that, are the subclasses built for the possibility that they could be used with a completely different archetype?
Yes and no. So every subclass builds off a class feature in some way. So so at third level, right, you get your subclass, you get some bonus traits like you might get from your background or species that are related to that subclass. Like if you take one that's related to like diplomacy, you would get persuasion proficiency, right? So those are things you get in addition to features. You also get 2 third level features. Now for every subclass, and I'm putting an asterisk on this, but you can't see it, one of those features will build off a core class feature in some way. So if you are taking that subclass from another class, that's something you have to consider, right? That feature doesn't work for you. But the second feature is almost certainly going to be like unlock spell casting, or maybe unlock superiority for a class that doesn't have it, or gives you there'll be a subclass dedicated to being a tank, the tank style tree, and it will give you features related to that. And so that obviously does work for any class that takes it. So there is a lot of possibility, but it's not simple with subclasses for that reason.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to casting, since that's the thing that's been brought up,
Yep.
Are you still using the spells per day, the Vancian model, when it comes to casting?
So we have 5 schools. 3 of them are casters. So for the traditional spellcasters, they're still using the spell slots with a very similar progression to what you're used to in 5e, but we have 4 tiers of spellcasters instead of just the full and half. Mm-hmm. So there's they still get a limited number of spell slots per day. Your cantrips are separate from your spells. Every spellcaster is a prepared caster in this version, so you learn a lot more spells than the other 2 casting types, but you prepare fewer, so you have to make choices. And then let's see, what am I missing? Oh, and then your ability is very fluid. So when you gain spellcasting, you choose an origin, and those origins are mystical, spiritual, and natural, and that origin determines your ability you use. So for instance, if you choose the mystical, you use, I want to say it's int or charisma offhand as your spellcasting ability, and you just choose it. And then those three origins tie to your spell subtypes. Spells have the same 3 subtypes, and it impacts how easily you can learn those spells. Yeah. But it's all one list.
So we're not dealing with a situation where every casting class has their own spell list.
Correct. Nope. Spell lists are entirely done by the casting type. So there's a list for spellcasters, there's a list for psycasters, there's a list for tech casters. There might be some spells that exist across them. Like, for instance, like a counter spell. There's a counter spell equivalent in all 3 of those, but they only work within that school.
Mm-hmm. Now, a problem that I had often had with half casters, aside from them being a bit too prevalent, is the fact that with a lot of them the selling point is Gish. Being able to do a bit of fighting and do a bit of casting, but not as good as a full fighter or a full caster. But with a lot of half casters, there's nothing to really integrate those 2 aspects. When it comes to the half casters and the 3/4 casters that you have, do you have it that there's certain elements that they can do that a full caster can't, vice versa?
So every class, like, they have their casting, but then they also have their features that are unique, right? So our Battle Mind is our half psi caster, and they have that Smite-esque feature where they can dump their psi points into just doing extra damage on a hit instead of casting a spell, right? So that's their kind of niche. And then Scout is our half tech caster. They can dump their points into gaining benefits over a specific target. And that's a way that they can use them outside of casting. Magus is our half spellcaster, and they can cast into their weapon and then have the spell occur when they hit with the weapon instead of casting it all at once. So it kind of gives more of that spell blade component, and that gets better. So they get that feature at first level technically. At second level, they can cast into the weapon, and then at 5th level, when they gain extra attack, they can do it as part of one of their attacks. So I think that identity is there, and we talked about the customizing classes as well. So if you like the idea of a Magus, but you don't want to be a spellcaster, you want to be a psycaster, there's a rule for that. So you can do that. You can play a tech caster version of a Magus. It works perfectly fine. There's a couple of very minor tweaks you need to make, but it does work very well.
Now, when you say a tech caster, is that like your version of like Magitech or an Artificer or the like?
I would say Artificer. So we have the Engineer, which is our full tech caster, and so they have that high level progression. They get to the 9th level spells. but they're called modules for tech. So engineer is probably closer to artificer, I would say. They have a very similar thematic, very different mechanical execution, since artificers I think are half casters now, but they were like the 4/9 casters before. So that's certainly the closest. Tech, it's all about flavor, right? I would say that that's the closest analog, but really it can be whatever you want in your game. So it could be high tech, like an Iron Man type of character, or it could just be a very savvy explorer who is able to like create effects from the materials around them. That could be your tech caster. It's really what you want it to be.
Yeah. So, of course, it sounds like with each of the classes, you have them in a sort of archetype family. Like Arcanist is your spellcasting focused ones. The focused is your key point equivalent. And I did get a bit of a chuckle in the description saying it's a certain class with a lot of polish.
Yeah, so that's the overview packet I was hinting at before that talks about the classes. That's all three of the focus classes. It's Berserker, Mystic, Operative, which are very clearly inspired from Barbarian, Monk, and Rogue, respectively, but like way more polished.
Yeah,
in my mind.
Monk is a fairly popular class for a lot of people to pick. In part due to the versatility they get from key as opposed to playing fighter. Like I said, fighters kind of have gotten the short end of the stick, arguably since day one. But is it a case where the key abilities are going to be a bit more varied? Because when you say polished, I'm curious what aspects of for instance, the monk you polished up to make the mystic.
So like for instance, compared to the 5e monk is really going to be the emphasis, right? Because this class came to fruition years and years ago, and then it's just been updated over time. So like the monk unarmed strike bonus action is decoupled from the attack action, so you can just do that. You can dash and disengage as a bonus action freely, and then your focus features enhance those bonus actions in some way, and you get a focus feature at second level. So for instance, for your unarmed strike bonus action, you can make 2 strikes instead of 1. Very similar to Flurry of Blows. But again, this is all decoupled from the attack action, and then at 11th level, it expands even further. You can spend 2 focus points to do 3 attacks with your bonus action instead of just 1. And similar building on the dash and disengage bonus action. So that's like a big part of it, but really I would say the most important thing is that second level of customization. So every class has a second level of customization beyond subclass. For monks, or mystics, sorry, that is their vows. So they have 15 vow options. They'll get a total of 6 over the course of their progression. And that really can skew the gameplay a lot. Some of them might offer a new ability to use their focus. Some of them just increase the number of focus points they have. You know, there's so much going on that every build will feel more unique because of that second level.
Yeah. Now with the Psionicist, you say in the preview that these are similar to the Force classes in Star Wars 5e.
Correct.
So would these be a non-Star Wars version of the Guardian, Counselor, and Sentinel?
Correct. Yeah. So Esper, Ardent, and Battlemind are effectively the equivalent. So if you wanted to play Unbound Realms in a Star Wars campaign, which very much works, if you wanted to use it instead of Star Wars 5e for a Star Wars 5e campaign, it would work. And it's literally just that Esper is Consular, but better. Ardent is Sentinel, but better. And Battlemind is Guardian, but better.
Yeah. And since Esper talks about overpowering their talents, is it a case where they can overpay to get boosted effects?
What they're doing is they're going above their cap, right? So if a 5th level Esper can only cast a 3rd degree spell, they can use this overchannel to cast it at 4th degree instead, but they suffer penalties for doing that.
Yeah,
So it lets them go above the max.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and it is fun. It is funny that you made the paladin comparison with the Battlemind. When I hear Battlemind, I immediately think of my time with Battlemind in 4th edition, where they were unequivocally the best tank. Because especially since they were the tank that actively punished with full-on damage, when they weren't targeted, as opposed to just penalizing rolls like some of the other tanks did in 4E. And there's always been the idea of covering when it comes to paladins, but I feel like in various editions of D&D that hasn't been as much of a focus. It sounds like that is that going to be a bigger focus with the battle mind?
Can you explain that one a little bit more? You said covering?
Yeah, as in taking the hits for other members of the
tanking.
Party.
Gotcha. So tanking is a fighting style tree, and there is a new taunt action which encourages creatures to attack you instead of your allies.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of it being a class that's dedicated to it, it's a fighting style tree. There will be a subclass that's going to be dedicated to enhancing it even further. It's going to actually be a Berserker subclass since it synergizes better with their resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with the customizing classes variant, you could conceptually take that subclass on any other class if you really want to be, like if you really want to go balls in on a tank. But it's really the focus is the action and then the fighting style tree that enhances it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, with the Superior, I feel like this is doing what the maneuver dice were supposed to do. Because one of my pet peeves going from D&D Next to 5e was the maneuver die mechanic being bottlenecked into one subclass of fighter as opposed to something that was a bit more widespread.
Correct. Yep.
It's
like the most common fix to every fighter. Every person who has done a fix to fighter in 5e has added maneuvers, and that's been the core component they do it, right? Like, I mean, Laser Llama is the one that comes to mind. Their classes are incredible, and their fighter has what is functionally maneuvers. It's by a different name, but that's the idea. So the 5 schools in Unbound Realms, we talked about this a little bit, all have a unifying characteristic that each of the 3 classes within that school is dedicated to. The Superior is the Scholar, the Specialist, and the Champion, and they are dedicated to... They're called tactics for us, but it's a similar concept. And it's more than just enhancing a strike, right? It's more than just using a trip attack when you hit somebody with an attack. There's also ways to enhance your ability checks. There are ways to unlock an action as a bonus action that you might have access to before. Like it's way more robust than just whatever the Battle Master.
Yeah. It also felt to me like the Battle Master early on was an attempt to do the Warlord in 4E, but it kind of missed the point.
Yep.
Because I've seen a lot of people try and house rule in some equivalent of the Warlord, which, if you don't remember the Warlord from 4th, the idea was the frontline commander. It was a evolution of the Marshal from 3rd. The analogy that somebody made was a barbarian hits you with his axe, a warlord hits you with his barbarian.
Yep. And our Scholar, of course, flavorfully very disparate, and they only have a D6 hit die, but they have an at-will ability to basically give their action away. So they're definitely the closest comparison to a warlord.
Yeah, where it's the defining feature that I've always said is that they shouldn't be manipulating their own kit. Their kit should be manipulating everyone else's kit to get the most out of it.
Yep.
In I suppose if I was to make a sports analogy, think of the quarterback. But when it comes to the technologists, the tech casters, so how do you have it so that the tech casting is distinct from the other types of casting that you do have?
Sure. So spell casting, of course, is the baseline, right? So you use spell slots, and you prepare your spells, right? That's really the biggest difference, and you recover on a long rest, right? So for Psycasters, you use points instead. You still have spell levels and things like that. You still learn your spells, but you know them all at once. Psycasters also have spell tier or spell prerequisites, right? So a 3rd level spell might be an improvement of a 1st level spell, and you need to know the 1st level one to get there, and consequently, they know more than anybody else. For tech casters, it's short rest recharge, but they get fewer points to use to spend on their spells, and the way their origins work is different. So when you gain tech casting, there are 3 subtypes of tech casting, which are hardware, software, and wetware. and you choose 2 of them. One of them costs 1 point extra, and one of them costs 1 point less. So that's like a huge way you specialize right out the gate. Short rest recharge, no trees or anything like that. It's all just you learn the powers, but you get fewer than the Psycaster.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of mechanical overlaps in the concept of like how does casting work, but the resources and flavor are very different.
Yeah, I can get that. In that regard, it sounds like you took the limited spell but short rest recharge thing that the Warlock had. That was one of the things people like about Warlock.
And we actually have that too. So we have what's called a variant rule for Pact Magic. So instead of when you choose a spellcaster, when you get the spellcasting feature, you can take Pact Magic instead, and we have rules for that.
And speaking of, obviously Warlocks had their invocations, which in some regards felt like something that was downstream from a feat in all but name. But would your equivalent of the Warlock have their own version of invocation, or is that handled by things like casting styles?
So we don't really have an equivalent of a Warlock, because I candidly believe that Warlock basically is born around Eldritch Blast, which is overpowered, and then invocations. So really, there's no Warlock equivalent. You would choose, if you wanted to play that Pact Magic style, you would choose an Arcanist class, or you would choose any other class with an Arcanist subclass, and then you would just choose the Pact Magic variant from there. So that's really how we would build a Warlock in this system. And again, every class has a second level of customization that is similar to invocations, though not every class approaches it the same way.
Now, when it comes to equipment, there's a few things that did strike my attention. One of them is armor granting a bonus to damage reduction instead of to AC. So I'm guessing there's not as much of an instance of plate armor makes you dodge better in Unbound Realms.
Correct. Yes. So the 2 biggest changes is that AC is no longer, like, your base AC is no longer just 10 plus Dex. Now it's 8 plus proficiency bonus plus Dex. So at first level it's the same, but as you progress, your AC actually goes up, which is one thing that always bugged the shit out of me about 5e, because it doesn't align with the philosophy behind attack rolls, and attack rolls and AC are obviously like directly related. And now with heavier armor, so instead of armor having a flat bonus to your AC, instead it gives you a bonus to your DR. So for instance, like a studded leather armor, I think is 12. Your AC goes from 10 plus Dex to 12 plus Dex. Now it's still 10 plus Dex, but you also get 2 armor DR, which just reduces the damage you take from attack rolls and any damage from weapons, which might not be an attack roll. So that's really the philosophy. Medium armor, instead of, you still have the maximum Dex you can add to your AC, and then you just get more DR. So that's where the trade-off is. I think it makes more sense thematically and mechanically. It does add a little bit more math, but it goes pretty quick once you write it down and get used to it.
Yeah. Now, with weapons, you talk in the preview about weapons being generated with a zero-sum calculator.
Yes.
That implies that there's a way for people to make fully custom weapons. Is
Correct.
that the case?
Yep. So this is going to be in one of the appendixes where we talk about building weapons. All of the weapons in Unbound Realms are generated using this calculator that I've devised, and you can generate your own. So if you have a collection of properties that you really want, and one of the 42 melee weapons I wrote that isn't exactly what you wanted, you can make it. And it automatically calculates if you use the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet itself won't actually be in the book because it's an Excel spreadsheet and it's literally automated. But if you use the spreadsheet, it calculates everything for you. You literally have to do nothing. You choose a martial weapon, you add the dexterity property if you want it, you add the powerful property if that's what you wanted, and then you add reach, right? And it tells you exactly what the weapon, the damage it does, the damage value it does. You choose the type, and then also what it costs and what it weighs. So it's all automated.
I can get that. And it also sounds like with tools, there's a bigger emphasis as well as actually putting in crafting rules instead of leaving it blank so that other people can do that job.
Yeah, crafting is a pretty sore subject in 5e and 5e adjacents that I've seen, in that the 5e rules are too narrow, or too broad, actually, the exact opposite. And people, I personally like a less is more approach to crafting. So we have very specific rules on how crafting works. Your crafting rate, what you need. If you need space, you need the tool, and all of our items are also categorized in such a way that it tells you what tool you need to make it. So, for instance, instead of our tool for creating clothing is called outfitters, and that makes things like clothes and backpacks and shoes and stuff like that. It's all one tool. Every item that is adventuring gear that you would find in the adventuring gear section of the player handbook is categorized as outfitter, so you know immediately what tool is used to create the item. So I think that system works very well for like the basic crafting component, and then enhanced crafting, which is our equivalent of magic, will come into fruition with a later book, which emphasizes a lot of the enhanced item rules.
Yeah, and it sounds like in that future thing, that's where you put things like magic item creation, which is another sore spot.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So I do not have rules necessarily for like creating a magic item from scratch, but for instance, you can create one based on existing properties. I've also got 3 subsets of enhanced items that are one for magic, one for tech, one for psi, and they all have very like flavorful nuance, and they're tied to having that type of casting when you create the item. So like tech has my modified item rules, which will be enhanced a little bit from SW5E if you've played those, which I really like. Psionics is going to have leveling weapons. And then traditional magic items will have like a random generation table similar to what you saw, I think, in the DMG for 5e, but like way more, in my mind, way more polished.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to using the core ability scores, you do mention a few tweaks. One of the ones that I do want to touch on is concentration, since this is another sore spot. It almost makes haste a false choice issue. How are you handling concentration?
So basically the 3 major, the 6 ability related saving throws are now distilled into 3. So instead of having a strength saving throw and a constitution saving throw, instead you have a fortitude saving throw, and then when you make a fortitude saving throw, you choose strength or constitution. So we do that with reflex, it's dex or int, and then with will, it's wisdom or charisma. So that's one component to it. We also have 3, those are called the 3 primary saving throws. We also have 3 secondary saving throws, which are death saving throws, exertion, and concentration. So those are our big 3. Now all 3 of those, you add your constitution modifier, even though you might not have done so in 5e, but to gain proficiency in them, it's separate from the reflex fort will. And then concentration is very similar to how it exists in 5e. You can only concentrate on one effect at a time, but it's massively expanded. Instead of it just being spells, there are maneuvers that might call for it. There are other effects. There are class features that might require concentration, and it does stop you from doubling up. But there is a casting style tree that lets you concentrate on more than one effect at a time, but it costs you to do so. You have to use your action every turn to maintain that dual concentration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I can certainly get. And when it comes to combat, it sounds like that with a lot of the skills, both old and new, there are combat options for those skills.
Correct. Yep. So what I refer to as attack replacers, which is like grapple, shove, grapple, shove, and trip. And there's at least one of those for every skill. We have 20 skills in Unbound Realms, so that's more than 5e. I think had 18. Some of them are new, some of them are tweaked, but every single one has an attack replacer. So when you take the attack action, instead of making an attack, you can use a replacer. And then all of the skill feats that are related to a skill let you do that as a bonus action instead. So it's there's one for each. We also are up to 20 actions in combat. So we have new ones like taunt and study, and we have one that's compel, which is to try to get somebody to do something for you in combat. So we have a lot more robust options on that front as well.
Yeah, that I can certainly get. And when it comes to the monster end of things, are you still using CR? Are you still using challenge rate?
We are, yep.
All right. And I know there's a lot of variance and a lot of customization on the player end of things. Do you plan on having not an equivalent level of customization, but a degree of customization in the mechanics when it comes to monsters, whether it be variants or something like that?
This is something I'm very proud of. So yes, we do. So monsters are still using the CR system. We will have monsters in this first book, a few dozen or so, mostly to demonstrate the new mechanics or those that are integral to the book itself. But the monster CR themselves will basically be unchanged. Some of the biggest things is like damage types have been tweaked, the saving throw things I mentioned before, AC and DR, things like that. As far as modularity, so modularity is the second key value. We've talked a lot about customization. We talked a bit at the beginning about versatility. Modularity is the idea that you can layer something on top of something to make it different. So we have monster roles, which will exist. Now, these are things that will be available, but not in this first book because we are going to do our own dedicated monster manual down the road. But the idea is that you can add a role to a monster to make that monster function differently. So for instance, if you have a party that wants to encounter a pack of wolves, instead of having 4 wolves that are all the same, you have a wolf that is a tank and that wolf can taunt. Or you have a wolf that is a gorilla, G-U-E-R, not G-O, and that can disengage. And they can do these things as a bonus action, so they're still attacking and stuff like that. So we have these roles, we have these elemental roles as well. So instead of having just a wolf, you could have a lightning wolf, and you could have both. So there's a huge amount of modularity that we will enable for monsters, and it works at every CR level.
Yeah. Which, the role thing does amuse me, because that was something that was very much pushed in the monster setup in 4E.
Yep.
And more importantly, using monsters as a collective team rather than a collection of individuals.
Yep, and we have our own rules for minions, and I'm going to have rules for what I call squads and swarms. But the idea is basically that instead of having, if you want to have an encounter that has 10 soldiers in it, but you don't want to run 10 soldiers, you can collapse them into a squad, and that squad functions as one entity that changes over time. Right, it could break up, or as you kill soldiers, that get smaller, things like that. So we have rules for that as well. And all this stuff, the idea is again really heavy emphasis on modularity. It can work together.
Yeah, and given the setting agnosticism, do you plan on putting any sort of advice or tips about what things to lean into if someone wants to emphasize certain genres?
So we will have some, this will be stuff that might touch on a little in the book, but we'll certainly touch on externally. So we're really encouraging setting guides. So we have a couple of partners already interested in developing their own setting guides. So that the core system is Unbound Realms, but then they have their own book that tools Unbound Realms for their table with the key components to change. So we'll have guidance for things like that, and I will absolutely help people that want to create their own setting guide like that, especially if they want to fund it like we did with Kickstarter. So yes, I don't know how much will be in this book itself, because it's also we have a 6-book suite planned. One of the later books is really going to focus a lot more on the DM side. So that might be something that is more appropriate then. But I also jump around a lot when I'm writing, so I will have mechanics and rules and stuff like that that are not going to go in this first book and will go in a later one, but they'll be available so people can use them if they want.
Yeah, I can get that. So when it comes to this first book, Unbound Realms, what are you shooting for as far as the page count for that?
Oh god, I think we're approaching 400. Thankfully, knock on wood, thankfully we're only doing a digital release. So if we end up at 500 pages instead of 400, that won't impact printing costs now. We're going to print versions down the road, but for the short term, I think we're somewhere at the 380 to 400 page.
And as far as the release window, are you shooting for later this year?
So Kickstarter funded today, in fact. So Kickstarter is live now. And then the goal is to have it ready to... Right now I write in a separate software than what the book will be finalized in. So the goal is to have it... We're going to have an alpha version ready to go at the end of the Kickstarter, within a couple weeks of the end of the Kickstarter, I should say. And then the book itself, the goal is to be done in about 9 months. And then from there we can just focus on slotting it into this new software and getting it the finalized PDF ready. So that's the thought process. Ideally about 9 months from now. We'll see. I do have a propensity to tinker. Anybody that followed SW5E knows that I finalized the player's handbook 6 times. So we'll see. But the goal is about 9 months after the Kickstarter ends.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. And it looks like you're already setting up its own community setup with having its own subreddits and the like, as well as what sounds like in the overview, your own version of the open gaming license specifically for Unbound Realms.
Correct. One of the Trinity, the 3 of us that are working on this project, one of us is a lawyer, and it will really be up to him. But basically, we will have an OGL that is very, very encouraging for people to write their own content for this system.
Mm-hmm.
And the rule, like, don't quote me on this just yet. Maybe I shouldn't even say it out loud because it's being recorded. But like, the basic rule will be don't reprint everything in your book. Just reference it. If there's something you need to reprint for like a small section that needs to be tweaked, that might be okay. But it's a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm. Which is fair. And honestly, when it comes to a lot of those caveats and the like, that's something of a consequence of the poison pill that was put in due to the OGL fiasco a few years ago.
Yep.
I've looked over like the orc license, and part of the reason there's so much legalese with that is just to make every assurance that what happened with the OGL isn't going to happen there. And
correct.
Given the moves that they made, it physically can't happen without pissing off the federal government.
Yep, and we will attempt something similar. Orc is obviously much bigger than us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just using that as an example.
Right, yeah.
To addressing the poison pill.
Right.
It's the prevailing narrative in the aftermath of that, and one that was revisited when that tweet was put out about Wizard of the Coast wanting people to do third-party content with the new 5.2 SRD was, if it was that easy for you to fuck me, what's stopping you from doing it twice? That was the sentiment I'd seen. So that's why I make the poison pill analogy.
Sure.
But with that said, I'll definitely be keeping a close eye on this kind of thing, since these projects is something I definitely predicted. This is why the Nostradamus jokes end up being made at my expense. And I'll look forward to seeing how it develops. Full disclosure, I am one of the backers.
Very cool, thank you.
And it has been brought to my attention that as we've been recording this, it has reached its initial funding goal.
Yep.
So, yes, the money raised is over 9,000. Make your jokes already. I know, I know you got them, people. I feel sorry for you because you're going to hear that a lot.
I literally, you're the first person to say that. We funded a few, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours ago, and it never once occurred to me.
I guarantee you it's going to get brought up within your community at one point.
Well, it's going to be happening right now.
Well, yeah, technically, but...
Because I'm going to do it.
Heading it off the pass, are we?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, somebody was going to do it eventually, so technically I'm still right.
Yep, and it was me, just now, at 2014. I did it. I broke the seal.
But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule and braving time zone hell to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens here.
To be fair, I think we're in the same time zone, so.
Yeah, just I have multiple bones to pick with time zones. So many bones that it may as well be a full skeleton. And anytime you see fit to return, whether it's going over possible character builds or the future books in the Unbound series, the door is always open.
Yeah, absolutely.
As I always say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody!
遅い上洛が 常年関税を往年関税を年々上新規年々不利し関税を南無仏用仏意用仏縁無法相上楽が上長年関税を往年関税を年々上新規年々不利し関税を南無仏用仏意用仏縁無法相上楽が上長